Hello and welcome to my channel, Solo Dungeon Crawler, and the second video in a series of how to play Dungeons and Dragons solo. In the previous video we selected an appropriate version of D&D to use for our solo game system. We also selected the Solo Dungeon Adventures written by Gary Gygax as a tool to form the basis of how we generate random dungeons for our game. This session will be mostly concentrating on creating our first player character for Basic D&D following the character creation rules in the 1983 Player's Manual. But first, I'm going to show you a few pieces of stationery you might need to play a game, and we all love stationery, I'm sure. So we have, of course, a pen, which we will use obviously to write things down. We have some pencils and a sharpener and an eraser, very important. Probably the most important thing for playing D&D in the using the more old school methods is pencils and erasers. Probably more important than actual dice. I got some ultra fine Sharpies. I absolutely love these things. They're great for, obviously, if we're going to be generating a dungeon on paper using a pencil. It's nice to kind of go over the lines and give them a bit more permanence and just make them really stand out with Sharpies. Sharpies are just your best friend when it comes to getting creative with tabletop role-playing games. Spiral notebook, just lined paper. This is going to be useful for making tables, which I've already started to do. I'll explain that later. I haven't finished it yet, but this is going to be perfect for just putting random tables together that will help us generate random things that are going to happen in our solo game. And an artist sketch pad, which I will explain how we're going to use that, but there'll probably be many ways that this will come in handy, but yeah, that's definitely going to be useful. I've also got, very important, lots of graph paper, and don't forget a ruler. We also need some dice, D4, D6, D8, D12, D10, D20 and D100. Now I'm going to talk about character creation. In order to create characters, don't forget we will be using the D&D Basic Set Player's Manual, published in 1983. And like I did in the previous episode, I'll include a link to the PDF version available through the Dungeon Masters Guild in the description for this video. So if you want to read through the full rulebook on character creation and really get to understand how the process works, then you've got an opportunity to do that. So before we create a character, the first thing we actually need is a character sheet in order to record all the characters' stats. There is one included in the Mentzer D&D Player's Manual, the Basic D&D Player's Manual. But what I did is, because we're currently social distancing with the coronavirus pandemic happening at the moment, I don't have access to a printer, and I don't have a hard copy of the Player's Manual at the moment. So I created a character sheet myself using the A4 sketch pad and my Sharpie, which does bleed quite a lot. I don't know if that's just because the paper's cheap, but I might have to look into getting a thinner pen for actually drawing the dungeons, but we'll see. But yeah, this is my character sheet. It's based on the one that's in the book, but what I've done is I've just added some. I've taken out the player's name and dungeon master's name because they're going to be playing solo. They're going to be the same person, so it's not really necessary to have them. So I made some more room by taking them out. I've basically included everything on one page, whereas the one in the book is a 2-page character sheet. So I actually put the money and treasure down in the left corner, and I put the equipment carried up in the right, and the experience and bonus and penalties and experience needed for the next level. That's all in the top right, which before was a big box to put a sketch of a character or a symbol in, but I'm not going to be doing that, so I've tried to use the best space. But the good thing about this is I could photocopy it to have several copies for making more characters as we go along with the campaign. But at the moment I can't do that because we're social distancing. So the next thing we're going to do is determine our ability scores for our character. And the way that it tells you to do this in the player's manual is to roll a 6-sided dice 3 times, which we would refer to as 3d6, and add the 3 numbers together and then assign them to an ability score. So and then you repeat this until all your ability scores have been generated. So that's the normal way of doing it, and that's the way it shows you in the book, and that will generate a character that has ability scores that range from between 3 and 18 for each score. But I'm also going to tell you about 2 alternative ways to do this, which will make the game less challenging, and this might help in terms of playing solo. So the first of these other 2 ways would be to roll 4 6-sided dice and take the lowest number away, and that way you would generate you would most likely generate a higher score. You've got more chance of getting a higher score, which means that your ability scores are more likely to be higher, and therefore your character will be more, you know, a stronger, more rounded character. The third way would be to use either of the methods that I've shown you, but if you wanted to play a particular class, write down your 6 scores on a separate sheet of paper and then assign them to the ability scores however you see fit, and that way you can decide which class you want to be, because the way it works is each D&D class has a prime requisite. So for example, a fighter, his prime requisite is strength, so if you wanted to make a fighter you want a high strength score. A magic user, it's intelligence, so you want a high intelligence score if you're going to make a magic user. Dexterity is the prime requisite for a thief, so if you wanted to make a thief you want a high score in dexterity, and so on. I'm just going to use the second method. I'm going to roll 4d6 and then I'm going to drop the lowest die and generate my scores that way. But I'm just going to put the ability scores in order, and then depending on how they are distributed, I'll choose a class based on on what would work best for the scores that I've generated. So I'm going to roll my strength score first, because I'm doing them in order. And I've got this trusty spiral notepad to write down my results. So we've got 2, 4, 6, and a 3. So obviously the 2 is the lowest score, so we will discard that. And we have a 13 altogether. It's 4 plus 6 plus 3 is 13. So we have a strength score of 13, which isn't too bad. So basically I'm going to repeat this for each of the scores and fill in my sheet. I've finished generating my ability scores. I scored 13, 16, 12, 9, 13 and 12. They're not too bad. We've got 13 strength, 16 intelligence, 12 wisdom, 9 dexterity, 13 constitution and 12 charisma. They're not bad scores. I would also say as well, as it says in the player's manual, if your highest score is lower than a 9, then I would advise discarding that character and starting again. And also if you have 2 scores lower than a 6, 2 scores or more lower than a 6, also discard the character and start again. And that way you'll ensure that you've got a character that has a reasonable fighting chance, especially of surviving in the world of solo adventuring, because it will be more challenging if you're opting for a more lone wolf type approach. And we'll talk about different approaches later. So the next step in the character creation process is to choose a class, and each class has what's called a prime requisite. So and that'll be based on the ability scores: strength, intelligence, wisdom or dexterity. So the fighter favours strength, the magic user favours intelligence, the cleric favours wisdom, and the thief favours dexterity. You could also opt for a dwarf, an elf or a halfling. And as the player's manual says, any human character can be any of the 4 human classes, but non-human characters are handled differently. If you wish to play a non-human character, you must have high abilities in certain areas. Elves have abilities similar to both fighters and magic users, so they must have good scores in both strength and intelligence. Both of these ability scores are prime requisites for elves. Also, if your character has an 8 or less for intelligence, the character cannot be an elf. Halflings have some fighting abilities and must have good strength and dexterity. Both of these are prime requisites for halflings. In addition, halflings are also very healthy. If your character has an 8 or less in dexterity or constitution, the character cannot be a halfling. Dwarves are always healthy too. If your character has an 8 or less in constitution, the character cannot be a dwarf. Dwarves specialise in combat, similar to fighters, so their prime requisite is strength. The following table in the player's manual shows the minimum scores for each of the non-human classes and also their prime requisites. The character that we've generated ability scores for has a 16 intelligence and a 13 in strength. So I'm going to opt for the elf, as the minimum score for an elf for intelligence is 9, so we're above that. And the prime requisites are strength and intelligence, and we have high scores for both of those, so we're going to opt to be an elf. So we've filled our character class in there, elf. The next thing we're going to do is exchange ability scores. So this is optional, and the way this works is you can raise a score in one of these ability scores by lowering another, and so basically to raise a score by 1 you need to lower another score by 2. You can't lower dexterity, you can only raise it, and you also cannot exchange charisma and constitution with any other score. So that leaves these top 3. And because our primary requisite is strength and intelligence, what I'm going to do is I'm going to exchange 2 points of wisdom for a further point in strength. Now we have a wisdom score of 10 and we have a strength score of 14. So the next step in the process is to roll to see how many hit points our character has. And there's a table in the booklet that shows what the hit point dice are for each class. So, for example, a fighter is 1d8, dwarf 1d8, cleric 1d6, elf 1d6, halfling 1d6, magic user 1d4, and thief 1d4. For purposes of playing solo adventures, we want to give our character a fighting chance. So I'm gonna, if you want to make it hard, roll for the hit dice as you would normally. An alternative method that you might want to opt for is to roll. So, for example, the fighter's hit point dice is 1d8. For a fighter, roll 2d8 and drop the lowest. Or a third option would be just to start with hit points equal to the maximum possible on the die. I'm going to opt for that method. So my elf has a hit point dice of 1d6, so I'm going to give my elf 6 hit points. After you've rolled your hit dice, the next thing you need to do is find your character's constitution score and apply any penalties or bonuses to the hit points. So, for example, if you have a constitution score of 3, you get a penalty of -3. If you have a constitution score of 4 to 5, you get a -2 penalty. Constitution score of 6 to 8 is a -1 penalty. 9 to 12, no adjustment at all. 3 to 15, you get a +1 bonus. 16 to 17, a +2 bonus. And 18, you get a +3 bonus. So, because our elf has got a constitution score of 13, he gets a +1 bonus adjustment. And therefore that increases his hit points from 6 to 7. And I've filled it in like this, so basically that's like the maximum number of hit points, which you can't exceed. So as the hit points go down, we can just erase this number here and change it, but that will always remain the same. The next step in the process is to roll to see how many gold pieces we start with. So to do this, we roll 3d6. We got a 2, 5, 9, and then we multiply the result by 10. So that gives us 90 gold pieces. So we will fill our 90 gold pieces in there. So the next obvious step is to choose the equipment you want to buy from the player's manual for your character. And before you do this, I'd advise reading the full description in the player's manual of the class you've chosen, just to find out what sort of proficiencies they have and special abilities. So it'll help you choose equipment and make sure you're not choosing equipment that you can't actually use. So as I said before, the player's manual PDF available from the Dungeon Masters Guild is going to be linked in the description of this video. So I've spent 85 of my 90 gold pieces, so I've only got 5 gold pieces left, and I bought the following equipment for my character. I bought a short bow, a quiver with 20 arrows and 1 silver tipped arrow. I bought a short sword, leather armour, and a backpack that contains a flask of oil, standard rations, which are unpreserved food which will last one person a week, a tinder box, and inside that is some flint, steel, dry wood shavings and twigs. I also bought 6 torches, a water skin, 12 iron spikes and a small hammer, and I also bought 50 feet of rope and a large sack. So that's the equipment that I will be starting my solo campaign with. So now we want to work out our character's armour class, and you can see that leather armour gives a base armour class of 7. So initially our armour class is going to be a 7. Next we check our character's dexterity score, which is a 9, and we look on the bonuses and penalties for ability scores table to see if there's any adjustment, and with a score of 9 there's no adjustment, so we don't get any bonus to our armour class. However, if you do get a bonus, then you subtract that bonus from your armour class, essentially lowering your armour class and making you harder to hit, as in the basic D&D system, a lower armour class means you are essentially harder to hit. So I've filled in my character's armour class there, 7. I've also filled in the numbers into the hit roll needed chart, as every starting character has the same chances to hit. You won't change the chart until your character gets at least to 4th level. So these numbers will be the same no matter what character class you're playing. So we've put our dexterity adjustment in. We don't have an adjustment, so I've just put a 0 in there. And also we check on the bonuses and penalties table for our strength score as well, and we have a adjustment of +1, and that +1 bonus is applied when our character rolls to hit on a 20-sided dice. The adjustment bonus is added to the roll. I've also noted the adjustment for wisdom as given on the bonuses and penalties table. So with a score of 10, our wisdom adjustment is at 0 as well. And intelligence, we have a +2 because we've got a high score of 16, and that means that we can learn 2 additional languages on top of the base languages that we already get. If you get a penalty on intelligence in regards to languages, there's a languages table in the player's manual, and that explains that if you've got an intelligence score of say 6 to 8, you can write simple common words, but that's it. From 4 to 5 you cannot read or write common at all, and if your score is as low as 3, then you have trouble with speaking and cannot read or write whatsoever. In regards to charisma, we look at the charisma adjustment table as given in the player's manual, and with our charisma score of 12, that gives us no adjustment, so we'll put a 0 in there. And basically that means that in regards to hiring retainers to help us on our adventure, our maximum number of retainers would be 4, and their morale score would start as a 7, and you'll learn more about that as we progress with the campaign. Building the rest of my character sheet, I looked at the stats for the elf in the player's manual. I've filled in all the saving throw scores from that, and also languages. The elf knows Common, the alignment tongue, depending on which alignment you choose, and I've chosen neutral. They also know Elf, Gnoll, Hobgoblin and Orc, and for the 2 additional languages I've gone with Goblin and Kobold. I've written down the special skills of the elf class: improvision, being able to detect secret doors on a roll of a 1 or a 2 on a d6, and they are spellcasters as well, and at first level I get 1 spell. I also get a 10% bonus to my experience, which is currently at 0, and that's because I have such a high intelligence score. I believe it's intelligence that gave me that bonus. And I need 4,000 experience points to get to 2nd level, and I have also chosen a name, Tyrell, for my elf, and I got that name from a fantasy name generator. I just googled elf fantasy name generator and used one of the online tools for that. So I definitely recommend using something like that if you can't think of anything off the top of your head. Definitely helps. It might inspire something cool for your characters to be called. So that's it. That's my basic D&D character sheet filled in. So we now have a playable character. I just need to choose which spell I want to prepare for when we start actually doing some adventuring. So we've created a single player character, but here we now have an opportunity to diversify. We have a lone wolf type character, which would be ultimately more of a challenging game just using 1 character, but also more straightforward. But we could opt to create a party to balance the game and make it less treacherous. Ultimately, this decision is up to you, but for the first playthrough, I'm going to opt for a single player adventure. Let me know in the comments the setup you'd prefer for solo play, lone wolf or party, and I will see you in the next video where we will begin our adventure.